Okay, this is American Literature, Chapter 13, page 296, War is Kind by Stephen Crane, who is one of America's most famous poets. Literary terms, verbal irony. What is meant may be the opposite of what is said. An apostrophe. In this figure of speech, the poet talks to or addresses a person or thing that is not present. Selection vocabulary. Affrighted means frightened. Steed is a war horse. Horse is grating and harsh. Regiment, a group of soldiers. Corpses are bodies of dead people. Trenches are ditches and gullies. Virtue means goodness, uprightness, and excellence. Slaughter is killing and slaying. A shroud is a cloth used to cover the dead. Okay. The poet says war is kind, but he tells how war is terrible. The poet says we should not cry for the thousands of men who die. We must tell soldiers that killing and dying are good. But the poet tells how young women lose their lovers in war, babies lose their fathers, and mothers lose their sons. Men die terrible deaths in war. War is not kind, but cruel. Okay. There are 3 apostrophes in War is Kind. In the first line, Crane, who is the poet, addresses a young woman whose boyfriend is killed in battle. "Do not weep, maiden," he tells her. What are the other 2 apostrophes in the poem? Whom do they address? So in other words, he's speaking to people who are not right there with him as he's writing the poem. Okay. "Do not weep, maiden, for war is kind. Because your lover threw wild hands toward the sky and the affrighted steed ran on alone. Do not weep, war is kind." Hoarse, booming drums of the regiment, little souls who thirst for fight. These men were born to drill and die. The unexplained glory flies above them. Great is the battle god, great and his kingdom, a field where 1,000 corpses lie. Do not weep, babe, for war is kind. Because your father tumbled in the yellow trenches, raged at his breast, gulped and died. Do not weep, war is kind. Swift blazing flag of the regiment, eagle with crest of red and gold, these men were born to drill and die. Point for them the virtue of slaughter. Make plain to them the excellence of killing and a field where 1,000 corpses lie. Mother whose heart hung humble as a button on the bright, splendid shroud of your son, do not weep, war is kind. Is war kind? Of course not. This poem is filled with this kind of verbal irony. In verbal irony, what is meant may be the opposite of what is said. So, for example, it's like sarcasm. It would be another word for verbal irony. For example, if we say, "Well, isn't that great?" when we really mean it's not great. Like an example would be, "Oh, I forgot about the test today. Well, isn't that great?" Well, of course, no, that's not great, but that would be verbal irony. Okay? All right. Literature practice. Number 1. First of all, answer these questions on the back of your vocabulary. Number 1, list 2 examples of Crane's verbal irony. Number 2, A, what lines from the first stanza does Crane repeat in the poem? And B, why do you think he repeats these lines? Number 3, who do you think Crane blames for the war? Number 4, who suffers during war? And number 5, write a final stanza for War is Kind. Follow the pattern set by Crane in the 6-line stanzas. Okay, America's war with itself. It was the spring of 1861. The newspaper headline said, "War." The Civil War had started. America's men threw their hats in the air and cheered. From Maine to Florida, young men raced to join their side's army. Everyone thought the war would be over in a month. No one wanted to be left out of the excitement. Few living Americans had seen war. Only a few people who fought in the American Revolution were still alive. Only they could remember how horrible war can be. Who would have listened to them anyway? 4 long years later, over 600,000 Americans had died in the war. All over the country were fields where 1,000 corpses lie. Death was all around. Cities were destroyed. Orphanages were filled. Starvation was everywhere. America had seen war. It no longer seemed exciting.